A twist of fate that would change everything. On a radiant London morning, Millionaire CEO Aaron Varela felt invincible, believing he had his world perfectly under control. 3 years prior, he had walked away from Isabella Morales, a woman whose serene gaze hid a strength he could never quite grasp. He was convinced their chapter was closed, that he would never see her again. But today, his meticulously ordered world shattered. He opened a simple folder that had mysteriously arrived at his office. Inside, among the photos and documents, he found not only the familiar face of Isabella but also the faces of 3 identical little girls. They had his eyes. His breath hitched in his throat. They were his daughters. This wasn't just a mistake from his past resurfacing. It was the undeniable truth, casting him as the villain in a story he didn't even know had begun. What he did next wouldn't be about pride. It would be about redemption. The penthouse in Barcelona felt like a glass case suspended high above the city. Through the massive windows, the Plaza de Catalunya pulsed with light below. Taxis moved with a patient, rhythmic flow. It was the deep heartbeat of a spring night, promising 1,000 different stories to anyone willing to listen. Inside, however, a thick, unseasonable silence fell like rain. The light-colored carpet, the marble table, the metallic sheen of the open kitchen, everything was arranged with a precision that spoke of habit and a need for control. Aaron Varela lived this way, with everything in its exact place, as if each object could guarantee his world would never shift an inch from his plans. Isabella Morales stood before him, clutching her small purse tightly at her side. It wasn't out of fear, but to hold back the torrent of words she wasn't being allowed to speak. For days, she had rehearsed what she would say, simple, clear, even tender phrases. But now, the words felt stuck, like frightened birds startled by a sudden, sharp noise. Aaron wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. The cold hardness in his gaze was enough, along with that subtle clenching of his jaw to keep it from trembling. He repeated what he had heard, what he chose to believe. He said he wasn't the first man to be used, and he certainly wouldn't be the last. He said his mother, Teresa, had spent her life spotting people like her, and she had always been right. He said many things, all of them ordered and forceful, like figures on a corporate spreadsheet. Isabella took a deep breath, searching for a tone that didn't sound like a desperate plea. She had loved him deeply. She knew his way of building walls with arguments. She knew that behind those walls, far behind them, was a man exhausted by disappointment, a man who preferred suspicion over the risk of repeating history. She had known it from the moment she first saw him at a student art exhibition, a place no one expected him to be. He had listened to a young woman speak about the color of shadows with an intensity that couldn't be faked. That's why she was here tonight. That's why she hadn't given up just yet. She looked at him and said they needed to talk, that there was something important, something truly important. He frowned, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. He told her not to be so dramatic. He repeated his mother's words as if they were a final verdict. The city lights on the other side of the glass cast shimmering reflections on the window's surface. Their images were superimposed on the Barcelona skyline like a faded photograph. 2 motionless figures in a luminous fishbowl, with the distant murmur of horns and laughter rising to an impossible height. Isabella felt a slight tug in her lower belly. It wasn't pain. It was a warning. She brought a hand to that spot, as if confirming a secret still new and tender. For a fleeting instant, she hoped he would see the gesture and understand. Aaron saw the movement, yes, but he interpreted it through his own defensive logic, twisting any detail into further proof of his suspicions. "We are not going to turn this conversation into a drama," he said, with the cold detachment one uses to sign an unfavorable but necessary contract. She held his gaze, her mind flashing back to their quick coffees on the terrace. Moments where he, for once, allowed himself to speak of his childhood, of Teresa's watchful presence at the start of every relationship, of the dizzying speed of his rise to the top. She remembered how he would ask about her students and smile as she described the 5 o'clock light falling on a watercolor painting. That memory wasn't an invention. She breathed in again and tried one last time. Aaron, please. This isn't about money. It's about something that involves both of us. He shook his head, a short, final gesture. He pointed to the door with a hand that did not tremble. I don't want to talk about this again. The distance in the room became almost tangible, as if the air had turned to water. There was no step forward, no brush of fingers, not even a moment of hesitation that might promise a pause. There was no connection, only the crushing certainty that nothing she said tonight would find a way through his armor. Isabella glanced around the room, at the table where they had shared so many meals, at the chair where he always left his jacket before loosening his tie. She saw the bowl with his keys, the vase of flowers she had chosen for their muted colors. Everything was the same, and yet, nothing belonged to either of them anymore. She picked up her purse. She didn't need anything else. She had left a couple of books on the shelf, a scarf in the hall, a single earring in the bathroom, small things that could vanish without a trace. She walked toward the elevator without any false urgency. Her heart was pounding, but her steps were steady and serene, as if each one were gathering the scattered pieces of her dignity. Behind her, Aaron said her name, but not to call her back. He said it to himself, as if testing whether he could still form the syllables without breaking. Then, nothing. Only the measured ticking of an invisible clock. In the hallway, the building smelled of wax and old stone. The sounds of Barcelona were muffled, a gentle, distant murmur. Isabella rested her forehead against the cold wall for just a second, the contact grounding her, bringing her body back to its center. She pressed the elevator button. As the indicator descended from an even higher floor, she remembered the first time she had come up here. She had been nervous about the vast difference between their worlds. He had greeted her with a simple, "Come in," that seemed to open every window. Now, that same air felt suffocating, closing off every breath. The elevator arrived. Inside, she caught her reflection in the narrow mirror. She saw a woman holding herself together, standing upright with her shoulders straight and her eyes weary. She didn't see a defeated person. She saw someone protecting a future. The tug in her belly returned, clearer this time, like an intimate bell ringing just for her. Then, 3 names floated into her memory, not chosen at random, but discovered on a short, luminous list she had been keeping. Lucy, Sophia, Camila. She didn't know yet if those would be the ones, but the music of their syllables fit the promise she carried within her. She smiled faintly, a minimal gesture that the mirror returned without any fanfare. Downstairs, the lobby smelled of marble, and a sleepy doorman was hidden behind a newspaper. The night air was mild. A taxi stopped the moment she raised her hand. She had no plan. And yet, something about the city seemed to grant her permission to begin anew. She gave the driver a random address, not to get there, but to buy herself a few minutes on the road, to think with the discreet hum of the engine in the background. The driver didn't ask any questions. Barcelona slid by around her like a reel of lights, plazas, familiar corners, shops closing, couples laughing. It seemed to Isabella that the city, in its everyday beauty, was offering her a gentle farewell, without any judgment. Aaron, meanwhile, remained under the lamp in his living room. He didn't move for a long time. The untouched glass on the table reflected a fixed, still image. He didn't want to admit it, but behind his anger, a much larger room was opening up inside him. The room of fear. Fear of having been wrong again. Fear of no longer being able to tell the difference between caution and blindness. He thought of Teresa and her catalogue of warnings, of the voice that had saved him so many times, but which, perhaps this time, had deafened him to the truth. He took a step toward the window and the city below. From this height, it was just a silent map. He searched for a pleasant memory and found Isabella, explaining why blue isn't a cold color if it falls at a certain time of day on a whitewashed wall. It seemed to him that he could still hear her voice, with that clarity of hers that never needed to shout. In the taxi, Isabella brought a hand to her belly again, not out of pain, but as a greeting. Her body was tired, but her mind was wide awake. She knew that days of questions and careful planning would come. She would have to find a room, a job, a nearby doctor's office, a new list of essentials. But she also knew that her first task was simply to sleep. The taxi dropped her off at a neighborhood guest house where a middle-aged woman attended to her without any curiosity. "A simple room for one night," Isabella said. The woman handed her a key with the practiced gesture of someone who understands that sometimes, all a person needs is a door that closes securely. In the room, she turned on the yellow light and left her purse on the chair. She opened the window and let in a little fresh air. The city sounded distant, gentle, like the whisper of a sea that doesn't exist. She took off her shoes slowly, sat on the edge of the bed, and allowed herself to cry for exactly 2 minutes, not one more. They were not tears of supplication. They were tears of adjustment, like when a new garment finally finds its shape on the body. She closed the window, turned off the light, and lay down. Before closing her eyes, she murmured a simple, unadorned promise to the quiet room. "I'm going to take care of us." Upstairs in the penthouse, Aaron tried to sleep, but couldn't. He walked through the house in silence, unknowingly picking up a glass here, a plate there, as if tidying the objects would restore order to his mind. He stopped in front of the vase and touched the almost dry stems. It was absurd, but it bothered him that no one but her knew how to change them. He told himself that the next day, everything would be back in its place. That work, meetings, and reports would bring back his old discipline. He didn't want to know, that there are some cracks that no routine can cover. The city, patient and indifferent, continued its dance without them. Barcelona always finds a way to console those who leave and those who stay. At that hour, next to the plaza, 2 street musicians were trying out soft chords on their guitars. A waiter arranged the chairs on a terrace, perhaps thinking about his own story. The night grew gentle, and the sky promised a clear morning. Isabella, now breathing calmly, did not dream of arguments or goodbyes. She dreamed of a calm beach, of a winter sun that warms without demanding anything in return, of small voices that did not yet have faces but already had a rhythm. There were no calls, no messages, no witnesses. There were, however, silent decisions that changed the direction of the lines on a map. His, to remain firm in his armor. Hers, to open a path toward what was possible. When the dawn began to wash over the city's facades, the penthouse returned to being what it had always seemed, a beautiful and cold viewpoint. In the guest house, the first light crept through the crack in the curtain and drew a soft line of clarity on the wall. Isabella opened her eyes with the serenity of someone who, at least for a few hours, has found refuge. She didn't leave a note. She didn't leave a complaint. She simply left. Perhaps she left an absence that, with time, one gets used to, like a familiar silence. Outside, the taxis resumed their slow transit, and the square woke up with its usual morning routine. At some point, a church bell marked the hour. Isabella sat up, rested her hand on her belly again, and smiled inwardly. The kind of smile you give to something that arrives without a sound. She would not go back. And he would never know that on that night, he had pushed away 3 of his own daughters. The regional train departed from Sant Station with a gentle rattle, slowly crossing the peripheral neighborhoods until it left behind the constant hum of Barcelona. Through the window, Isabella watched as the urban landscape transformed into green hills and open fields dotted with old farmhouses. A light drizzle fogged up the glass, drawing threads of water that ran down as if they wanted to race the train. She had chosen the window seat not to enjoy the views, but to find a corner where no one would try to start a conversation. She clutched her purse against her lap, feeling in her lower abdomen that silent presence that was still her secret. She didn't think of the destination as a fixed place, but as the promise of not having to meet certain gazes again. The conductor announced the next stop, and the familiar accent of the loudspeaker brought her back to her childhood, to summer trips with her mother to the coast. She remembered, almost with a jolt, the only time she visited Cadaqués as a child. A bright July day with the smell of salt and freshly fried fish in the air. That image now felt like an internal compass. She didn't have a detailed plan. There was no job contract waiting for her or a guaranteed home. But she felt that this town, nestled between cliffs and the sea, would offer her a gentle anonymity. As the train advanced, the hills opened up to reveal glimpses of the Mediterranean. The waves crashed against the distant rocks with a hypnotic rhythm. In the seat opposite her, an older man read a folded newspaper, and the aroma of coffee escaping from his thermos reminded her of the quiet mornings she didn't know if she would ever experience again. The rhythmic rattling was like a heartbeat that kept time with her breathing. She closed her eyes for an instant, listening to the metallic sound of the wheels on the rails and letting that sound clear away the images of the night before. When the train finally arrived at the nearest station, the humid, fresh air greeted her with a mix of sea breeze and wet earth. From there, a small bus took her along narrow roads that meandered between olive groves and stone walls. The passengers, few and silent, greeted the driver upon boarding with a simple, "Good day," and a slight smile. Isabella noticed the difference in the tone, in the calm that seemed to permeate everything. The rain turned into a fine veil that blurred the colors of the whitewashed houses as the bus began to descend toward the bay. Cadaqués appeared like an old postcard. The white facades were terraced down to the port where fishing boats rocked gently. The bells of the church of Santa Maria resonated with a measured echo that seemed to mark a different, slower time than the city's. The driver stopped in front of the Plaza del Passeig, and she got off, feeling how the cobblestone pavement returned a pleasant coolness through the soles of her shoes. For a moment, she stood still, watching a group of children play with a ball while an old man watched them from a bench, his hands resting on a cane. Dragging her suitcase, she walked down a narrow alley flanked by pots of geraniums until she reached a small guest house. The wooden sign, painted by hand, read, "Casa de Carmen." And at the door, an older woman with her hair in a bun and a flowered apron greeted her with a smile that asked no questions. "Do you need a room?" she said in a warm voice. Isabella nodded, and in a few minutes, she was inside, wrapped in the comforting aroma of soup coming from the kitchen. The room was modest but clean, with a simple bed and a window that revealed a small slice of the sea. She left her suitcase next to the closet and rested her forehead against the cold glass. The sound of the waves came in faintly, like a whisper that confirmed she was far away far enough to start over. As evening fell, she went out to explore the port. The sky had cleared, and a soft orange glow was reflected in the water. Fishermen were returning with their nets, and some were selling their catch directly from their boats. The air was filled with salt and the aroma of freshly baked bread escaping from a nearby bakery. She walked past a cafe where customers at small iron tables conversed quietly. A waiter collected the empty cups, leaving the change and a tip on the saucer. A simple custom that Isabella observed with a mix of curiosity and familiarity. She stopped at a bench facing the sea, watching as the lights began to turn on in the houses that climbed the hillside. She thought about the city, about how far away everything seemed now. The penthouse, Aaron's harsh voice, the things she hadn't been able to say. She took a deep breath, letting the smell of the sea fill her lungs. It wasn't an end, she told herself. It was a curve in the road, one of those that changes the landscape suddenly. On her way back to the guest house, Carmen greeted her with a bowl of hot soup and a piece of bread. They ate together in the kitchen, talking little but with comfortable silences. Isabella felt that, at least for that night, she was not completely alone. She went up to her room, sat on the bed, and opened the window to let in the fresh air. The waves crashed softly, and in the distance, the church bell marked the hour. She rested a hand on her belly and whispered the names she had repeated on the train, testing how they sounded in a low voice, as if she wanted the sea to hear them too. As she settled into sleep, she thought that at dawn she would look for a job, perhaps in the bakery or in a cafe on the promenade. She didn't know how long she would be there, but she sensed that Kadax, with its slow pace and discretion, would give her the space to prepare for what was to come. She closed her eyes with the certainty that she had arrived at a place where, at least for now, no one knew her story. In that small corner of the world, no one knew her past, and that was a new kind of freedom. Kadax awoke to a clear sky and a soft light that spilled over the whitewashed rooftops. The air was filled with the smell of freshly baked bread and the salt brought in by the sea breeze. Isabella had woken up early, not out of habit, but from a mix of nerves and hope. Through the window of her small room in the guest house, she saw the first seagulls flying over the port, and beyond, a boat swaying in the calm of the morning. She took a sip of water and dressed in simple clothes, ready for her second day at Matteo's bakery, a job she had gotten after several days of asking around the town. The bakery was in the Plaza del Passeig, a place that in the mornings was filled with neighbors greeting each other with 2 kisses and curious tourists with their cameras. When she arrived, Matteo already had his hands covered in flour, and the oven was lit. He was an elderly man with a stooped back and a patient gaze who had taken her in without asking for explanations. He calmly taught her how to knead, how to cut the dough, and how to place the loaves on the wooden paddle so they would enter the oven without losing their shape. Isabella listened attentively, grateful for the routine and for the feeling of belonging, even if only temporarily, to something stable. By mid-morning, the aroma of freshly baked bread mixed with the murmur of conversations. Regular customers would come in, ask for their usual loaf, leave a few coins as a tip on the tray, and leave with a smile. Pilar, a woman with gray hair in a bun, would always stay a few minutes longer to comment on the town news. Ramon, a fisherman with weathered hands, would sometimes bring fresh fish in exchange for a couple of loaves for his family. Isabella adapted to that rhythm, like someone being lulled by a familiar song. In the hours of less work, she would take the opportunity to organize the shelves and clean the tables in the back room, while the 3 improvised cribs for her daughters waited in the corner of her small house near the shore. Every afternoon after the workday, she would return with a bag of warm bread and some cookies that Matteo would set aside for the girls. The house was modest, with whitewashed walls and cold tiled floors, but it had a window that overlooked the sea, and that, for her, was enough to feel that she was in the right place. The days passed with a calm, steady cadence. On Tuesdays, Isabella would travel to Figueres for her medical checkups. She would go alone, carrying a folder with the reports and ultrasounds in her purse, and would return with the peace of mind of knowing that everything was going well. During those bus rides, she would observe the landscape of olive trees and fields, thinking about how each season painted the surroundings with different colors. Sometimes, an older lady in the seat next to her would offer to talk, and she would respond politely, being careful not to give away too many details. One morning, while preparing a tray of bread rolls, she felt a brief, sharp pain in her abdomen. She leaned on the table, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. Matteo, seeing her, put down the oven paddle and approached her with concern. "Are you okay, my dear?" he asked in a deep but kind voice. She smiled, downplaying it, and said they were just Braxton Hicks contractions. He frowned, and without arguing, he told her to finish up soon and go rest. As she was leaving, he handed her a small bouquet of lavender wrapped in paper. "So you can have the smell of home with you," he said. Isabella felt a lump in her throat and thanked him in silence. On her way home, she crossed the square where children were playing with a ball and old people were chatting on benches. She stopped for a moment to look at the sea. The water shone with silver reflections, and the fresh air cleared her mind. She thought about everything she had left behind and how, despite the uncertainty, each day in Kadax offered her some peace. She remembered the feeling of that first night alone in the guest house and compared it to the warmth of now, with the greetings of the neighbors and the familiar murmur of the bakery. At her house, she placed the bread on the table, opened the windows to let in the breeze, and put the lavender bouquet in a vase next to the bed. While preparing a coffee, she heard the bells of the church of Santa Maria announce the hour. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound mix with the aroma of coffee and bread. It was a simple instant, but for her, it meant much more. It was the confirmation that, at least for now, she had found a place where she could raise her daughters in peace. In the afternoon, when the sun began to set and the golden light covered the facades, she went for a walk along the promenade. She greeted Carmen, who was sweeping the entrance to her guest house, and stopped at a grocery store to buy some fruit. The owner, a robust man with an easy smile, recommended some sweet oranges that had just arrived from Valencia. Isabella took them home, imagining the girls' faces when they tried them. As she cut the fruit and prepared dinner, she thought about how every small gesture of the day had become part of a routine that gave her strength. The work in the bakery, the brief chats with the neighbors, the smell of the sea in the morning, everything formed an invisible network that held her up. Although she didn't know how long she could keep it up, she promised herself to make the most of every day, to take care of her daughters and herself. As night fell, she sat by the window with a cup of tea. From there, she could see the lights of the port reflected in the water and hear the gentle lapping of the waves. She covered herself with a blanket and let her mind wander for an instant to what she had left behind. She didn't feel sadness, but a mix of gratitude and determination. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and told herself that as long as she had this corner by the sea, she could face whatever came. She didn't know that a few kilometers away, Aaron Varela's name was still appearing on magazine covers, associated with new projects and important meetings. She didn't imagine that the world she had left behind would find a way to get close again. For now, her life was here. Between the warm bread of each morning and the constant murmur of the sea. At that moment, that was all she needed. The dawn arrived with a strange silence, broken only by the light tapping of the rain against the shutters. Isabella woke up before her alarm clock, with a feeling of discomfort that she couldn't quite place. The house was shrouded in dimness, but the air felt different, denser. She slowly sat up and put her feet on the cold floor, trying to clear her head. As she took a few steps toward the kitchen, a sharp pain in her abdomen stopped her in her tracks. She put her hands on her belly, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. She knew that the last weeks of pregnancy would be heavy, but this pang was new, intense, and it didn't completely disappear. The doctor had already warned her that, with a multiple pregnancy, labor could come early. Still, she was not prepared for it to be so soon. She got dressed as best she could and took the phone to call Mrs. Carmen, who had always offered her help. Carmen's voice, calm and firm, told her that she should go to the hospital immediately. In a matter of minutes, the woman arrived at her door with a large umbrella and a bag with the essentials. Outside, the cobblestone street shone from the rain, and the gray sky seemed to weigh on the white rooftops. A neighbor called a taxi, and the driver, upon learning of the urgency, offered to take them directly to Figueres without charging them extra. The journey felt long, with the constant sound of the windshield wipers and the blurred vision of the coastal landscape through the foggy windows. At the county hospital, the white lights and the smell of disinfectant immediately enveloped her. A young nurse greeted her with a smile that tried to convey calm. Isabella answered the routine questions while they transferred her to the delivery room. The doctor, a middle-aged man with thin glasses, reviewed the ultrasounds and confirmed that the contractions were regular. "They are going to be born today," he said in a confident voice. Isabella's heart was beating fast, a mixture of fear and relief. She knew the time had come and that she would have to face it alone. The following hours were a whirlwind of sensations. Between contractions, she thought of the faces of the girls she had not yet met. In every brief break, she tried to imagine their hands, their eyes, their cries. Outside, the rain was hitting harder, and the sound was muffled by the walls. Mrs. Carmen, sitting in a corner, offered her words of encouragement and held her hand when the pain intensified. The medical staff worked with efficiency and without unnecessary haste, measuring time with precision. Finally, a wave of activity filled the room. The lights were adjusted. The nurses positioned themselves around her, and the doctor asked her to take a deep breath. With an effort that seemed to come from the deepest part of her being, Isabella felt the first cry cut through the air. It was a sharp, clean sound that brought tears to her eyes. She barely had time to process it when the second one arrived, and shortly after, the third. 3 distinct cries that seemed to form a single melody. "They are 3 girls, and they are healthy," the doctor announced with a smile. Nurse Laura, a woman with clear eyes and a soft voice, brought the first one to her, wrapped in a white blanket. Isabella looked at her as if she was trying to engrave every detail into her memory: the reddened skin, the tiny fingers, the expression of someone who had just discovered the world. The second and third arrived in her arms almost immediately, and the emotion became an impossible torrent to contain. They were small, fragile, but each one had a different expression. One seemed more awake, another calmer, and the third moved her hands with energy. Isabella hugged them, feeling that the world was reduced to that instant. In the midst of extreme exhaustion, she found the strength to whisper the names she had been saving for weeks. Lucy, Sophia, and Camilla were not just names. They were promises. When everything was over, they transferred her to a bright room with a large window. From there, she could see a piece of gray sky that was beginning to clear. Mrs. Carmen came in with a wide smile and left a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked that morning before the rain on the nightstand. "So you feel like you're at home," she said. Isabella thanked her with a squeeze of the hand, aware that without her help, everything would have been much more difficult. The nurses placed the cribs next to her bed, and for a while, Isabella couldn't take her eyes off her daughters. She watched them breathe, how they moved slightly, how they occasionally brought their hands to their faces. She thought of Aaron, of his absence, of the certainty that he knew nothing of what had just happened. She didn't feel anger, just a soft melancholy, like a shadow that cannot be completely erased, but that does not obscure the main light. That first night in the hospital was a mix of exhaustion and vigilance. Between feedings, she would get up to check that the blankets were covering the girls well. She would listen to the silence of the hallway, broken by a distant step and the faint beeping of the monitors. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the smell of wet earth filtered through the half-open window. At one point, a nurse approached to comment that the 3 of them were surprisingly similar, not only to each other but also to someone she didn't know. Isabella smiled without responding. The next morning, the light came in clearly through the window, illuminating the white blankets and the babies' calm faces. The doctor came to check on them and confirmed that everything was in order. "They are strong," he said, "and that's a good omen for what's to come." Isabella nodded, feeling how those words were etched into her spirit like a blessing. Before leaving the hospital, Mrs. Carmen helped her dress the girls in the small outfits she had prepared weeks ago, each with a hand-knitted hat, all wrapped in soft blankets. The trip back to Cadax was slow, with stops to accommodate the babies and make sure they were comfortable. Upon arriving, the town seemed to welcome them with its usual rhythm. The sea crashed softly against the pier. The seagulls flew in circles, and the aroma of freshly baked bread came from Mateo's bakery. At home, Isabella placed the 3 cribs in the brightest room, near the window that overlooked the sea. She sat in a chair next to them, watching them sleep, and felt a peace she hadn't remembered in a long time. The exhaustion mixed with a new energy, the certainty that she had a powerful reason to move forward. Outside, the sun was beginning to break through the clouds, and a ray of light entered through the window, illuminating the bouquet of flowers that Carmen had brought. It was as if the day, the town, and the sea were all coming together to welcome them. That night, as she prepared the last feeding before bed, Isabella whispered their names again like an improvised lullaby. Lucy, Sophia, and Camilla. 3 suns in the same sky, she thought, and smiled. The time had come to build a new life. And although she knew it wouldn't be easy, she felt that she had everything she needed to start. Among warm loaves of bread and the persistent aroma of coffee, the 3 girls grew up, crawling around the back room of the bakery. Lucy, Sophia, and Camilla were already moving around with an insatiable curiosity, touching everything and laughing with that contagious joy that filled the small place with life. Isabella had achieved a balance between her work and the care of the girls, thanks to the help of Matteo, who welcomed them every morning as if they were his own granddaughters. The old baker would talk to them in a deep, slow voice, and sometimes he would give them pieces of soft bread to keep them entertained while their mother served customers. The Plaza del Passeig was the heart of the town, and from the door of the bakery, one could see how life passed at a peaceful pace. Neighbors would greet each other with 2 kisses, tourists would walk around with cameras in hand, and old people would always occupy the same bench to comment on the day's news. The routine was simple, but for Isabella, it had the value of an anchor. In those first years of motherhood, any gesture of stability was a treasure. Every morning before opening, Isabella would help Matteo place the loaves in the display case and prepare the trays of sweets. The oven gave off a heat that contrasted with the fresh air that came in from the street. The tinkling of the bell on the door marked the arrival of regular customers. Pilar, for example, always bought the same whole wheat bread and would stay for a few minutes to chat, talking about the weather, the town's festivals, or old recipes. Ramon, the fisherman, would appear with his hands still wet from work, leaving a trail of salt on the floor, and would usually take day-old bread to make fish stews for his family. Meanwhile, the girls would play in a corner, delimited by empty boxes and blankets. Lucy was the first to try to open the door to explore. Sophia would observe everything calmly before moving, and Camila seemed to have an inexhaustible energy. The customers would smile when they saw them, and many would leave small cookies or candies next to the register. Isabella appreciated these gestures, aware that in a small town, signs of affection were a form of acceptance. In the moments of less work, Isabella would go out to the square for a moment with the girls. They would sit on the terrace of the café across the street, where the waiter already knew their orders, a café con leche for her and 3 glasses of water for the little ones. She would always leave a few coins as a tip, as was the custom, and would smile at the cookies the waiter offered them. From there, she could see the sea and hear the constant murmur of the waves, a reminder that calm was still possible. As the months passed, her relationship with the neighbors grew stronger. Some would offer to bring her bread or milk at home when they knew the girls were sick or when the weather was bad. Matteo, in addition to being her boss, had become a figure of trust. He taught her to recognize when the dough was just right, to measure the oven temperature without a thermometer, to understand that in the bakery, as in life, patience yielded the best results. One afternoon, while arranging a tray of freshly baked pastries, Isabella felt the curious gaze of Pilar. The woman was watching the girls play near the counter. "Those little ones look like they were taken from a photograph I saw years ago," she commented in a casual tone, but with an inquisitive gleam in her eyes. Isabella smiled and quickly changed the subject, asking about the next patron saint festival. However, the phrase hung in her mind for the rest of the day, like a silent warning that her past could reappear at any moment. As evening fell, after closing the bakery, Isabella returned home with the girls. They walked slowly through the cobblestone streets, stopping to greet acquaintances. The sun was setting behind the hills, tinging the white facades with gold. At home, the smell of fresh bread still mixed with that of the stew she had prepared that morning. The girls ate with enthusiasm and then settled in next to their mother to listen to a story before bed. Isabella read in a calm voice, enjoying the moment as the 3 of them, little by little, closed their eyes. That night, while tidying up the kitchen, she thought again about Pilar's words. It wasn't the first time someone had mentioned the obvious resemblance between the girls, but until now, no one had hinted at a connection to another person. She looked out the window at the sea, which reflected the moonlight, and felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief because she had built a safe space. Fear because that space could be disrupted if certain truths came to light. In the following weeks, she focused on maintaining the routine, opening the bakery every morning, greeting the neighbors, spending time in the square, walking along the port on Sundays. Each repeated gesture reinforced the feeling of home. However, beneath that calm surface, Isabella knew that she couldn't control all the threads of her story. In a town like Cadaqués, news and rumors traveled fast, and although so far no one had asked direct questions, she had a premonition that it wouldn't always be that way. Still, as she watched Lucy, Sophia, and Camilla grow up surrounded by affection, she decided to live each day without anticipating her fears. Each smile from the girls, each new word, each small achievement in the bakery were reasons to keep going. And in that fragile but constant balance, she found the strength she needed to hold it all together. The lights of the porch shone like fallen stars, while the music of guitars filled the night. The air of Kadax was filled with a mixture of aromas, the sweetness of freshly fried fritters, the smokiness of sardines roasting on makeshift grills, and the fragrance of the flowers that adorned the stands of the spring festival. Isabella had agreed to go to the festival only to please her daughters. Lucy, Sophia, and Camilla had insisted for days, excited about the idea of wearing matching dresses and ribbons in their hair. She couldn't deny them that moment. They had chosen light-colored dresses, which she had found in a second-hand store, and which now looked new under the light of the streetlights. They walked hand in hand, jumping with excitement at every detail, while Isabella tried to hide her discomfort in the middle of the crowd. The festival occupied the entire promenade. There were colorful lanterns hanging from one side to the other, long tables where neighbors and visitors shared dishes and bottles of wine, and a stage where a group played soft habaneras that invited people to move slowly. Children ran among the stands, and the adults conversed in groups, exchanging news and anecdotes. Isabella let herself be carried away by the atmosphere. She bought a cone of roasted chestnuts for the girls and watched as their faces lit up with each bite. For a moment, she felt calm, as if that night there were no other worries than making sure they didn't wander too far. Near the main entrance of the event, a group of people was gathered around a tall man dressed in a light suit. Aaron Varela had arrived in Kadax that same afternoon as part of his foundation's delegation. The invitation to attend the charity gala included a tour of the festival for press photos. His presence, however, went beyond formality. He had accepted the invitation as a way to escape the routine of Barcelona and an emptiness that he could not fill with business or meetings. He walked along the promenade, greeting people, shaking hands, smiling politely, but without fully engaging in the conversations. During a pause, as his assistant offered him a glass of wine, Aaron let his gaze wander over the crowd. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was just observing the bustle, the contrast of colors and faces. And then he saw her. Isabella. She was standing near a dessert stand, half turned toward three girls who were laughing at something they had on their plates. Her hair was simply tied back. She wore a dress that moved with the sea breeze, and she had a posture that was a mix of elegance and naturalness. It couldn't be a coincidence. His heart skipped a beat, but what really took his breath away was looking at the girls. Three identical little ones, with the same dark hair color that he remembered from his family, and eyes that were, without a doubt, his. The glass trembled in his hand, and he had to put it down on the nearest table. He felt the noise of the festival fade around him. Without thinking, he began to walk toward them. He moved between groups of people, receiving automatic greetings that he barely registered. Each step confirmed what his instinct had already dictated. Isabella, feeling a fixed gaze on her, turned. The first instant was pure surprise, followed by a disbelief that transformed into something colder. Their eyes met, and neither of them looked away. Aaron stopped in front of her. For a few seconds, time seemed to stretch. He saw her just as she was before, and at the same time, different, more of a woman, more firm, with a tense calm he didn't remember. She saw him with his impeccable suit, his confident demeanor, but with a vulnerability she had never known. Behind her, the three girls had fallen silent, watching the unknown man with curiosity. Aaron looked down and observed them closely. The resemblance was impossible to deny. He leaned in slightly, and in a low voice, asked, "Are they mine?" The silence between them was thick. Isabella clenched her jaw, looked at her daughters for an instant, and replied in a firm and controlled tone. "Yes. All three of them." The answer hit him like an invisible punch. Aaron took a small step back, trying to organize his thoughts. The crowd around him continued to enjoy the music and food, oblivious to the tension that had settled in that small circle. Isabella didn't add anything else. There was no reproach in her voice, but there was the weight of everything she had lived through without him. The girls, not fully understanding, looked from one to the other. Lucy, the most assertive, was the first to break the moment. She approached Aaron, studied him with her head tilted, and said naturally, "You look like us." The innocent comment made Aaron feel a lump in his throat. Isabella gently took Lucy's hand and said, "Come on, honey. Let's get some air." She began to walk away with a firm step, the three girls following her closely. Aaron reacted, took a step forward, and with an urgency he couldn't hide, said, "Wait, please. I didn't know, Isabella. If I had known." She turned just enough to look him in the eyes. "But you didn't care enough to ask," she replied with a hint of sadness in her voice and continued on her way without looking back. Aaron stood still, watching them get lost in the crowd until their figures blended in with the sea of people. He didn't try to follow them. He knew it wasn't the time. The festival came back into his ears, the laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses. But he felt as if he were in another place, at a point where everything he thought he knew was falling apart. He couldn't get the image of the girls out of his mind, of their faces, of the certainty that they were a part of him. Isabella, meanwhile, walked away until she found a quieter corner near the shore. The reflection of the lights on the water seemed to move to the rhythm of her accelerated breathing. The girls resumed their chatter about the desserts and the music, not fully understanding what had happened. She listened to them, responding with smiles and soft words, but her mind was occupied with Aaron's unexpected appearance. She had feared such an encounter for years, and now that it had happened, she felt a mixture of relief at having no secrets and fear of what would come next. The night continued on the promenade with the usual joy of the spring festival. Isabella decided to go home before the girls got too tired. As they walked along the cobblestone streets illuminated by lanterns, she promised herself that, at least for that night, she would not let anything disrupt the sense of celebration for them. The three of them were talking at the same time, laughing and pointing out the details of the festival that they had liked the most. Isabella listened to them, clinging to that image of normalcy. Aaron, back in the main area of the event, tried to resume his protocol role, but every greeting seemed mechanical. The image of Isabella and the girls haunted him like a persistent echo. He knew he couldn't go back to Barcelona without trying to talk to her again. That night, while the port was still lit up and the music was slowly fading, he made a silent decision. He wasn't going to let this second chance pass him by, even if he had to start from scratch. Aaron did not sleep well that night. The echo of Isabella's words and the image of the girls mixed in his mind like a restless tide. At dawn, he decided that he couldn't leave things as they were. He was not looking for a confrontation, but an approach that would allow him, at least, to open a door. Before leaving the hotel, he asked his assistant to cancel all his meetings for the day. He didn't have a clear plan, but he knew that the only way to find her was to walk around Cadax and let the town, small as it was, guide him. He walked along the cobblestone streets, stopping in the central square, where the murmur of morning conversations felt foreign but comforting. The aroma of freshly baked bread from Mateo's bakery immediately drew him in. He entered with a mix of nervousness and determination. Behind the counter, he saw an old man with a warm apron stained with flour and a friendly smile. Before he could say anything, Mateo greeted him politely. Aaron ordered a coffee and a bread roll, trying to look like a regular customer. He observed every corner, looking for signs of Isabella or the girls. He didn't see them, but he did notice a corner with children's drawings taped to the wall. And he recognized the clumsy hand of a small child drawing three identical figures holding hands with a woman. While he was savoring his coffee, Mateo asked him where he was from. Aaron replied that he was from Barcelona and that he was in town for a few days. The baker nodded with that unhurried gesture of those who have seen many stories pass through their door. When Aaron mentioned that he had met Isabella the night before at the festival, Matteo frowned slightly. "She's a good woman. She's been through a lot to be where she is now," he said without going into more detail. Aaron sensed that it was not the time to insist. He paid, leaving a few coins as a tip, and said goodbye, but he was already certain that that place was an important part of Isabella's life. Later, he found her by chance in the square, sitting on a bench while the girls ran after some pigeons. She was dressed simply in a light cardigan over a summer dress, and she seemed lost in thought. Aaron approached slowly, not wanting to scare or bother her. "May I sit down?" he asked cautiously. Isabella looked at him for a few seconds before giving a brief nod. The silence between them was filled with the girls' laughter and the murmur of the nearby fountain. "I haven't stopped thinking about what you said last night," he began. She didn't reply, but she kept her gaze fixed on the movement of the water. "I'm not trying to justify myself, but I didn't know that. That we were parents." The word came out with a particular weight. Isabella sighed, and for the first time, she looked at him directly. "Aaron, at that moment, you made decisions that left me alone. It wasn't my job to chase you or to convince you to care." He let her words sink in slowly, feeling that each sentence of hers was a reminder of what he had lost due to his own blindness. "I want to know them," he said at last, in a lower but firm voice. "I am not going to allow someone to enter their lives only to disappear again," she replied without raising her voice, but with a determination that left no room for doubt. The girls came running back, interrupting the conversation. Lucy climbed onto her mother's lap while Sophia and Camilla stood watching him with that curiosity that children don't know how to hide. Aaron smiled cautiously. "Hello again," he said, and Camilla, the most mischievous, gave him a shy wave. Isabella took the opportunity to stand up. "We have to go," she announced. Aaron did not try to stop her, but before she walked away, he asked, "Can I stop by the bakery one day and say hello to them?" She stopped for a few seconds, then she nodded without promising anything else and continued walking with a sure step. In the following days, Aaron adopted a routine. He would walk along the port in the mornings, have coffee on the terrace in the square, and from time to time, he would stop by the bakery. He didn't always see Isabella, but he did see the girls, who were already starting to greet him naturally. He was content with these small advances, understanding that any change had to be earned little by little. Matteo, ever the observer, began to treat him with a certain cordiality, as if he wanted to give him a chance, but without forgetting his protective role toward Isabella. One Saturday afternoon, as Isabella and the girls were leaving the bakery, he offered to walk them to the promenade. She hesitated, but accepted. They walked together, talking about trivial things, the weather, the next month's festival, the town's traditions. The girls ran ahead, collecting shells in the sand, and from time to time, they would come back to show him their findings. At one point, Sophia handed Aaron a small shell and said, "So you don't forget about us." He put it in his pocket as if it were a treasure. That afternoon, Aaron allowed himself to remember what he had felt at the beginning of his relationship with Isabella: the admiration for her strength, the attraction to her way of looking at the world. Seeing her now, he understood that that strength was not only still intact but had grown. He also understood that his place in the girls' lives depended on earning their mother's trust and that this would not be achieved with grand gestures, but with consistency. When they reached the end of the promenade by the port, Isabella stopped. "I don't know what you're trying to do, Aaron," she said calmly. "I want to get to know them and be present. I'm not here to take anything from you, but to add to their lives, if you let me." She studied him in silence, as if evaluating the sincerity behind his words. "We'll see," she replied and began to walk toward her house. The girls waved goodbye, and Aaron felt that, although small, that gesture was a step forward. That night, sitting on the terrace of his hotel, he thought about what he had accomplished in just a few days. It wasn't much, but he had opened a space for dialogue, and that was already more than he had hoped for when he arrived. The murmur of the sea accompanied his reflections, and a conviction grew within him. He couldn't change the past, but he did have the opportunity to build something in the present, and he was willing to try, for them and for himself. The morning in Kadax dawned clear, with a blue sky that stretched uninterrupted over the calm sea. Isabella had decided to take the girls to the weekly market, a bustling place where stalls of fruit, cheeses, flowers, and crafts created a mosaic of colors and aromas. The little ones walked ahead, jumping from one side to the other, admiring the stalls full of oranges and crowns of lavender. Isabella, although she smiled at seeing them so animated, maintained a certain internal tension. She knew that Aaron was making an effort to get closer and that, little by little, his presence was becoming habitual. This consistency was new to her, but it was still hard for her to let her guard down. As they walked through the market aisles, Aaron appeared from the seafood section with a couple of bags in his hand. He was dressed simply in a light linen shirt and beige pants, and he moved naturally among the people, greeting some vendors as if he had lived in the town his whole life. When he saw her, his face lit up with a discreet smile. "Good morning," he said in a warm voice. The girls ran toward him, showing him the flowers they had chosen. Aaron crouched down to greet them and commented on how pretty they were, asking if they had chosen their favorite colors. Isabella observed the scene in silence, recognizing that, at least with them, he seemed genuine. They decided to walk through the market together. Aaron, who knew a lot about gastronomy, suggested products for a meal at home: seasoned olives, freshly baked bread, a cured cheese from the region. With each recommendation, the girls nodded enthusiastically, and little by little, Isabella found herself accepting his help to carry the bags. It wasn't a big concession, but it was a small step. The conversation between them remained light, focused on everyday topics, recipes, local festivals, the arrival of summer. When they finished their shopping, Aaron suggested they get a coffee on a terrace near the square. Isabella hesitated, but the girls had already sat down at one of the tables in the sun, excited about the idea of ordering orange juice. The café was lively, with the aroma of freshly ground coffee mixing with that of croissants. The waiters moved with skill, serving tables and chatting with the regular customers. Aaron ordered for everyone, and when the drinks arrived, the atmosphere became more relaxed. Camila began to tell a funny story from school, and everyone laughed, even Isabella, who was surprised to find herself participating in the conversation without reservations. In the middle of the conversation, an older man approached the table. It was Ernesto, a neighbor who had known Isabella for years. He greeted them cordially, but as soon as he looked at Aaron, he frowned. "So, it's you," he said in a low but firm voice. Isabella tried to soften the tension by introducing Aaron formally, but Ernesto did not hide his suspicion. "I hope you're not here to hurt her again," he added before saying goodbye. The silence that remained afterward was uncomfortable. Aaron took a deep breath and said, "I know not everyone will give me a chance, but I'm not going to leave." Isabella didn't reply, although inwardly, she valued that he didn't defend himself with excuses. Later, as they were walking Isabella and the girls home, Aaron stopped in front of a music store. In the window, there was a classical guitar with a shiny finish. He smiled and, almost without thinking, went in. The girls followed him, curious. He took the guitar, tuned it with sure hands, and began to play a soft melody, a traditional Catalan piece that Isabella recognized instantly. The music filled the small store, attracting the attention of other customers. When he finished, the girls applauded and asked for another one. He promised to play more for them if they could ever get together in a quiet place. That night, Isabella prepared dinner with the products bought at the market. While the girls talked non-stop about the morning and the guitar, she thought about the way Aaron was integrating not only into her routine but into that of the town. There was something in that consistency that was beginning to slowly break down the walls she had built. However, she also knew that the wounds of the past would not heal with a few kind gestures. Aaron, for his part, returned to the hotel with a sense of progress. It wasn't a radical change, but he had shared a simple meal, some laughs, and a moment of music with them. That, for him, was a solid start. As he looked at the guitar he had decided to buy in the store, he thought about how he could use music as a bridge to get closer to his daughters. He imagined entire afternoons teaching them chords and songs, building memories that he never had the opportunity to live before. The next day, without warning, Aaron showed up at Mateo's bakery with the guitar slung over his shoulder. The girls, who were there helping their mother, greeted him with shouts of surprise. He sat in a corner and began to play. Soon, the small place was filled with customers who were drawn in by the music. Isabella watched him from behind the counter, unable to help but smile at the girl's evident happiness. She didn't tell him to stay, but she didn't ask him to leave, either. For Aaron, that gesture was worth more than any words. As the afternoon was falling, the town prepared for a small, impromptu street party in the square with hanging lights and long tables. Isabella and the girls attended, and Aaron was also there, helping to set up chairs. He was not looking for attention, but simply to be present. During the community dinner, the neighbors shared dishes and anecdotes. Little by little, some began to talk to him, although with caution. Aaron accepted that slowness, aware that trust was earned with time and consistent actions. The night ended with music and dancing. Aaron, guitar in hand, played several popular songs, and the girls danced around him. Isabella, from the side, watched him with an expression that mixed prudence and a certain tenderness. She knew that there was still much to resolve, but she couldn't deny that the scene of her daughters laughing and dancing had something healing about it. As they walked back home, the girls talked non-stop about the evening. Isabella listened to them, and in silence, she wondered if perhaps she could allow herself the possibility of believing in a second chance. The morning in Cadac's dawned shrouded in a light mist that was slowly dissipating over the sea. Isabella was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard the postman's gentle knock on the door. She opened it and received a cream-colored envelope with no visible return address, only her name written by hand in a firm and elegant handwriting. She held it for a few seconds before opening it, as if she had a premonition that its contents would stir up something deep inside her. As she unfolded the paper, she immediately recognized Aaron's handwriting. The letter began without empty formalities. Isabella, I know I don't deserve your trust and that my words may arrive too late, but I need to tell you what I never said. As she read, her breathing became slower. Aaron recounted how, at that time, fear and family pressure had blinded him. He confessed that his mother had influenced his decision to walk away, convincing him that he was not prepared to take on the responsibility. He acknowledged that that choice was his biggest mistake and that time had only increased his regret. I lost years that I will not be able to get back, but I want to dedicate the rest of my life to being a good father to our daughters. I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately, just to let me prove it, he concluded. Isabella left the letter on the table and stood still, looking out the window. The sun was beginning to filter through, illuminating the quiet streets. She remembered nights of loneliness, moments of anguish, but also the strength she had found in herself to raise her daughters. Part of her wanted to flatly reject any attempt at reconciliation. Another part, quieter, felt that those words had a different weight, as if they had been born from a real reflection and not from a passing impulse. When the girls came downstairs, the morning routine brought some normalcy. They made toast, argued about what dress to wear to school, and laughed as Camila tried to comb her own hair. Isabella did not mention the letter, but she put it in her purse, as if she did not want to put it too far away. She spent the day with a strange feeling, torn between suspicion and involuntary curiosity. In the afternoon, as she was leaving the bakery, she saw Aaron waiting for them on the corner with his hands in his pockets and a serious expression. He did not approach them immediately, waiting for her to make the decision. The girls greeted him happily, telling him what they had done at school. Aaron listened to them with attention, crouching down to be at their height. Then he looked at Isabella and, without words, asked her with his eyes if they could talk. She nodded, and they moved a few meters away from the bustling crowd. You received my letter, he said, more as a statement than a question. Isabella nodded. Yes, I read it, and I don't know what to tell you. Aaron looked down for an instant, then held her gaze. I just wanted you to know the truth. I'm not looking for excuses. I know that the harm I did cannot be erased with a letter, but I also know that I cannot continue to live without trying to fix it. Isabella took a deep breath. It's not that easy, Aaron. It's not just about you and me. There are 3 more lives at stake. He nodded. That's why I want to do it right, step by step, not to force anything, just to be present. The conversation was interrupted when Sophia came running with a bracelet made of colored threads. Mommy, look what Clara gave me at school. Aaron smiled and said it was very pretty. Isabella looked at it, wondering if perhaps there was room for a repentant man to find his place without destabilizing what she had built. That night, after dinner and putting the girls to bed, Isabella read the letter again. This time, she paid attention to the nuances, the pauses, the phrases that revealed an effort not to sound dramatic but sincere. She remembered the way Aaron had avoided pressuring her that afternoon, how he had let her set the pace. She put the letter in a drawer, but not with the intention of forgetting it, but of keeping it close. The following days brought small gestures. Aaron would stop by the bakery and buy bread to take to the school where the girls were participating in a cooking project. He helped set up tables in the square for community events. He greeted the neighbors with respect, even those who looked at him with distrust. Isabella observed everything from a certain distance, evaluating whether that consistency was real or a facade. One Saturday morning, the town organized a beach cleanup day. Aaron arrived early with gloves and bags and worked alongside other neighbors without seeking the spotlight. The girls, excited, collected shells and trash, learning about caring for the sea. At one point, Lucy tripped and scraped her knee. Before Isabella could react, Aaron was already crouched down, calmly checking the wound and taking a small first aid kit from his backpack. The way he comforted his daughter with patience and tenderness did not go unnoticed by Isabella. At the end of the day, as the sun was setting and everyone was sharing an impromptu snack, Isabella approached him. I've been thinking, she said in a low voice so that only he could hear her. I don't know where this will lead us, but I'm willing to let the girls spend more time with you, under my conditions. Aaron looked at her with a contained sparkle in his eyes. I'll accept anything, Isabella. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. They walked toward their houses together, with the girls running ahead. The sea breeze brought the smell of salt and freshly baked bread from the nearby bakery. It was not a total reconciliation, but it was a bridge that was beginning to be built. Aaron knew that he would have to prove every day that he could be a constant support. Isabella, for her part, felt that although the past could not be changed, the present offered the possibility of something different if they were both willing to work for it. That night, as she closed the windows and turned off the lights, Isabella thought about the letter once more. Not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a starting point toward what could still be recovered. Outside, the murmur of the sea seemed to accompany that thought, like a silent promise that some wounds, with time and care, could begin to heal. The day of the triplets' birthday dawned bright, with a clean sky and a fresh air that announced the beginning of spring in Cadax. Isabella got up early to prepare the special breakfast she always made on this date, churros with hot chocolate, freshly cut strawberries, and orange juice. The girls came downstairs still in their pajamas, with messy hair and eyes full of expectation. Amidst laughter and hugs, they began to talk about the party they would have that afternoon at the house facing the sea, where friends and neighbors would gather to celebrate. Aaron arrived shortly after with a box wrapped in lavender-colored paper and a gold ribbon. He greeted them with affection, kissing each girl on the forehead and congratulating them in an emotional voice. Isabella received him with a prudent smile, but without the rigidity of their first encounters. For weeks, they had established a routine in which he participated more in the girls' lives, and although it was not perfect, he had slowly earned a place. That morning, however, the occasion had a different weight. They were not only celebrating the birth of their daughters but also another year in which the family, although rebuilt, was beginning to find a new way of being united. The house was soon filled with preparations. In the backyard, Aaron hung colorful garlands and helped set up a long table covered with a white tablecloth. Isabella was in charge of the food, while the girls decorated glass jars with wildflowers they had picked the day before. The aroma of the paella bubbling in the kitchen mixed with the sound of the waves breaking on the nearby shore. Some neighbors began to arrive early to lend a hand, and the atmosphere became festive. Mid-morning, Aaron asked for a moment to talk to Isabella alone. He took her to a quiet corner of the garden and, with a sincere expression, handed her a small envelope. Inside were 3 identical pendants, each with a different colored stone and the initial of each girl engraved on the back. "I want you to have them as a symbol that I will always be present," he said. Isabella held the jewels in her hands, feeling the weight not only of the metal but also of the gesture. "Thank you," she replied in a tone that reflected both gratitude and caution. When it was time for the party, the house and garden were full. The tables overflowed with food, Spanish tortillas, bread with tomato, cold cuts, and trays of homemade sweets. The murmur of conversations mixed with the soft music coming from a small speaker. The girls ran from one side to the other, laughing with their friends and proudly showing off their new pendants. Isabella moved among the guests, making sure everyone was comfortable, while Aaron busied himself serving drinks and talking with the neighbors. At one point, Mateo, the baker, asked for silence so the girls could blow out the candles. Everyone gathered around the main table, where a large cake decorated with sugar flowers was waiting. The 3 girls, one next to the other, closed their eyes to make a wish. They blew at the same time to applause and cheers. Aaron, with shining eyes, looked at Isabella and then at his daughters, as if he wanted to engrave that instant forever. After the cake, a surprise that Aaron had carefully prepared arrived. He took his guitar and called the girls to sit around him. "This song is for you," he said. He began to play a sweet melody with chords that recalled the folk songs he had learned as a child. The lyrics spoke of 3 stars in the sky that illuminated his life and guided him home. The girls listened to him with wide smiles, and some guests were moved. Isabella felt a lump in her throat, aware that the music at that moment was weaving a stronger bond between them. As the afternoon began to fall, the sky was tinged with pink and golden tones. The party moved to the nearby beach, where they lit a small bonfire. The children played in the sand while the adults talked in groups. Isabella and Aaron walked together to the shore in silence. At first, the sound of the sea and the crackling of the fire filled the space between them. Finally, he spoke. "Thank you for letting me be a part of this. You have no idea what it means to me." She looked at him and, in a serene voice, replied, "I know there is still a long way to go, but today, seeing you with them, I think that maybe we can build something good." They stood for a moment, watching how the girls jumped over the small waves, their laughter carried by the wind. Aaron felt that although the past could not be changed, the present offered him an opportunity that he did not intend to waste. Isabella, for her part, understood that clinging only to pain would not allow her to move forward. That celebration, simple but full of meaning, marked a new chapter. At the end of the night, when the last guests had said goodbye and the house was quiet again, Isabella went up to put the girls to bed. She tucked them in and stayed for a moment, watching them sleep. In the living room, she found Aaron clearing dishes and turning off lights. "You can go and rest. I'll finish here," he told her. But she shook her head. "No, we'll do it together." They worked in silence, sharing knowing glances. When everything was in order, they went out onto the porch. The sea breeze was cool, and the moon illuminated the sea with a silver reflection. Isabella turned to Aaron. "Thank you for the letter, for the gestures, and for not giving up," she said. He smiled, a humble and sincere gesture. "Thank you for giving me a second chance, Isabella." There were no hugs or grand promises, just a silent understanding that, step by step, they were building something new. The night closed with that shared silence, looking at the horizon. It was the end of one stage and the beginning of another, more uncertain, but also more hopeful. Deep down, they both knew that the true strength of a family was not in perfection, but in the will to repair, to forgive, and to move forward. The sea continued its constant ebb and flow, a reminder that although everything changes, some things, like the desire to be together, could remain. Years later, the little house by the sea in Cadax was more than just a home, it was a sanctuary filled with laughter. Lucy, Sophia, and Camilla were now bright young girls, each with her own distinct personality, yet bound by an unbreakable triplet bond. Lucy was the adventurous one, always first to dive into the waves. Sophia was the artist, her sketchbook always filled with charcoal drawings of the sea and the town. And Camilla was the musician, her fingers flying across the guitar strings Aaron had taught her to play. Aaron never returned to his penthouse in Barcelona. He sold his company, trading the world of high-stakes business for the simple rhythm of life in Cadax. He and Isabella now ran the bakery together. They expanded it, adding a small cafe on the side with tables that overlooked the plaza. It became the new heart of the town, a place where neighbors gathered for coffee and stories. Their love story wasn't a fairy tale rekindling of an old flame. It was something quieter, deeper, and more resilient. It was built on shared mornings kneading dough, on patient conversations, and on the mutual joy of watching their daughters grow. It was a love forged in forgiveness and strengthened by daily commitment. On the girl's 10th birthday, the entire town gathered on the beach for a celebration. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the water, Aaron stood with his arm around Isabella, watching their daughters dance by the bonfire. The 3 pendants he had given them years ago glinted in the firelight. He leaned down and whispered in her ear, "This is everything. I had everything I thought I wanted back then, but I was empty. Now, I truly have it all." Isabella smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "We have it all," she corrected him softly. They had found that the greatest fortune wasn't in a London skyscraper, but in the simple, profound richness of a family built on a foundation of second chances. Their story became a quiet legend in the small town by the sea, a reminder that redemption is always possible, and that true love, a love that heals and builds, can find its way home, even after the biggest storms. If you enjoyed this story of love, loss, and redemption, please consider subscribing to our channel. We have so many more tales to share with you. Just click that subscribe button and join our community. Thank you for watching.